allowing yourself to go through the stages of hurt and pain and loss and joy and happiness, all the various emotions that we go through any type of loss, to not to try to control that at what stage you should be at by this stage. So trying to balance the negative emotions and allowing yourself to experience the positive emotions as well.
Hello and welcome to Chaps Out with me, Grant Philpott, the podcast where I talk to men about coming out later in life and get to have the conversations I wish I'd heard when I was looking for advice. Conversations we still don't hear often enough in the UK. This podcast is for anyone navigating their own personal coming out journey wherever you may be. And remember, you are not alone. Please be aware, the following conversation includes sensitive subject matter.
My guest today is originally from Northern Ireland, where he was married to his former wife for almost 11 years. He also spent 18 years as part of a strict conservative evangelical church community before relocating to England in 2019 to begin a new chapter in his life. He now works as a regional director within the social care sector across London and Kent. So I'm delighted to welcome to the Chaps Out podcast the resilient and inspiring Tyrone Richardson Best. Hi, Tyrone.
Good morning.
How you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
It's good to see you. So I always like to start basically with the your sort of coming out journey and your the story of how that sort of came to be and the age you were when you reached that decision.
So I was married for 10 and a half years, nearly 11 years. I obviously lived in Northern Ireland, as you've kindly mentioned. I come out at the age of 35, and that was in 2009. So you can work out my age now. And actually, that was quite onset. Obviously, struggled with my sexuality from school age, teenage years. But again, living in a very conservative, a very political divided community in Northern Ireland at the time of the Troubles, that actually the idea of understanding any gay peers in my school or even in my local community, if there were any, I didn't know anybody. And again, I always felt that that would not be accepted. And that would be a challenge for myself, but also for my family, because we lived in quite a built-up area. So I felt by coming out, the risk may be impacting my family as well. So there, and maybe that was an excuse for me. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was an underlying anxiety around it. So I started my career at the age of 18, training to be a nurse. And that was around 1992. And I trained as a nurse, as a general nurse and a psychiatric nurse. And I think part of the psychiatric nursing training also helped me understand a lot more around the sense of what may cause people to be oppressed. And actually looking around mental health and studying it academically, I realized that there was something more that brought me into being a psychiatric nurse and then going into being a general nurse, as there was something more about understanding myself and all of this, because I always felt there was something different. And we hear some, various other podcasts and various other people sharing their stories of sexuality and coming out and where they feel something different. And I think it was because I wasn't maybe the stereotypical of being a heterosexual man, but trying to be a heterosexual man to feel accepted and not to feel marginalized in my community or the risk of losing my family.
Yeah, and not sticking out, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So trying to fit into that social norm of whatever that social norm may be, around trying to be heterosexual, trying to prove myself that I like sports, trying to prove myself that I would do masculine activities. I tried to prove myself that I needed to have a girlfriend and be part of that, and also being part of a church community. So I developed faith at the age of 18, which had kind of spawned along with my going into being a student nurse. My family would have been brought up in a very church, but not very traditional. My parents didn't have faith at that stage, but we would have gone to very typical Northern Ireland culture that if you were Catholic, you went to Mass. If you were a Protestant, you went to church, and that was an expectation. Families did that. And I think it's maybe a little bit less now as we're where church attendance as a whole has become a lot more less now. And there's a lot more multicultural and multi-faith now than maybe going back 20, 30 years ago. So yeah, so I went to church, found faith at the age of 18, and I think that was a sense of maybe thinking that if I founded a faith in God, that that would hopefully maybe change my inner feelings around attraction to same sex. But that didn't really happen. It just suppressed it more and come to realize that actually this church community and this belief that I had and the people I started to develop peer friendship with really would not accept sexuality in a sense of somebody being gay or lesbian. So I thought, right, I just got to make the best of this. And then later on, a few years later, met my then wife. We got engaged, got married, lived very, very actively involved in church life. I was very involved in worship and music, involved in lots of leadership work in the church, and threw myself into that to keep myself really busy, as well as my career in nursing. And I progressed my career in nursing, but that was to keep myself really busy. But when I look back at that now, that was a form of distraction and total deflection.
So you met your wife through the church, then I assume.
I did, yeah, I did. And we were married for nearly 11 years, 10 and a half years. And we had lots of good experiences. And I look back at that and say, I think she was my friend. And I think we were really close friends. We enjoyed each other's company. We liked to travel, so we did a lot of travel. We both had good careers, so we did a lot of travel together. We were very involved in church life, very close to our families, and that was all very, very important. So there was lots of positives to that, and lots of sense of feeling belonging and a sense of safety and a sense of, yeah, I think there was a love there, but I think we loved each other as friends.
Yes. And with the church, did the homophobia or anything like that, did that ever sort of come up?
It did quite, yeah, you're right, Grant. And it came up quite regular, because at that time in Northern Ireland being, okay, Northern Ireland's part of the United Kingdom. So at that same time, there was a whole thing around the whole AIDS crisis. So I remember being even a student nurse and at that time and the AIDS crisis coming out and the British government at that time had done a whole big advert and it was all the advert, I don't know what people recall it, but it was quite a worrying advert and it was quite a scary advert. And as a student nurse and then also learning around, how to nurse people with AIDS. It was more talked about AIDS than HIV. And again, it was seen as a death sentence. And that was nearly how it was advertised, even by the British government. And that was a sense probably to try to scaremonger, but also to try to reduce the risk of a world crisis around this condition because there wasn't enough research done to understand that people could actually live who've got AIDS. So it was the understanding and the myth was out there that if you developed AIDS, you're going to die very, very soon, that there wasn't really a treatment, and there probably was limited treatment at that stage. So yeah. So in my church life, there would have been a lot of preaching in the Sunday services around homosexuality and the whole thing around that it was sinful and it was evil and it was from the devil and it wasn't from God and it wasn't from who you've been created to be. This is either that you have either, and being told if you have those beliefs, there would be a belief that you could be demon possessed. So you then started to realize, and I started to get quite scared about that and started to realize that, okay, there's something wrong here. And that led me down a path about maybe 6 or 7 years into my marriage that my wife and I then, and we never had children. But I remember thinking, and I'd never had a relationship with a man right up to that stage. I'd not had a relationship with a man. So I had an attraction to same sex, but I'd never had a relationship. I'd never had any form of intimacy with a man ever. So that was kind of thinking, oh, maybe it's just maybe a feeling I'm going through. Maybe actually, if I was even to have intimacy with a man, that wouldn't even be the thing, you
Mm,
know. So maybe it's just more a thought rather than anything else, or a fascination, and that's it. So I tried to park it and suppress it, but I really struggled about 6 years into my marriage and realized that, oh, I'm obviously demon possessed, because that was a belief that my church that was preaching on a Sunday service quite regular. Lots of Christian literature out there was to say that if you were gay or had same-sex attraction, that definitely there was something wrong with you psychologically. And a lot of Christian psychologists, you know, particularly American Christian psychologists, would have had the belief and preached and wrote books around that actually, if you were gay, you definitely had attachment issues with your father, that you obviously your father wasn't a strong enough male role model in your life to let you believe that you could be that masculine heterosexual person, and also you may have a controlling mother. And that has been lots of Christian literature written at that time was around that, and this was by quite a lot of American Christian psychologists had this belief. And I remember then thinking, okay, then I started to really delve into, and this was me already qualified as a psychiatric nurse and general nurse, you
mm,
know, 2 or 3 years qualified. I remember thinking, well, actually, I think my father is quite a masculine man, and I think my father is quite a positive role model. You know, he's not somebody who's really, you know, he's quite respectful to my mother. He's respectful to our family. He's been a good dad.
mm,
And my mother, I didn't feel was a domineering mother. I felt that she, if anything, was trying to encourage my brother and I to always, you know, do the best we could in education and be a positive role model. And then I started to really question, okay, maybe what is going on? Maybe my family is even more screwed up, because what these American Christian psychologists are
mm,
saying, well, my mother should be domineering and my father needs to be a more positive male role model. And I kind of think, well, I don't think there could be any more than that. And I'm thinking, well, my family then must be even more screwed up, because this is the scenario that I'm in. And these psychologists will know better than I will, because they have studied psychology at academic level, you know, and PhDs in psychology and the human behavior. And then it challenged me in my own psychiatric professional career that I studied at degree level as a psychiatric nurse, thinking, okay, well, this just doesn't marry. Then I started to realize that there were some of my peers, being male nurses, who were gay,
ah,
who, who I then worked alongside, never really was friendly with him, because I also had this fear that if I was seen to be friendly with him, that then I could be associated being gay, and I had this fear of being outed, or
mm,
actually the risk of actually being attracted to them.
mm,
So then I had to try to create this boundary, and it was more than just a professional boundary. It was an intrinsic boundary to really ensure that I kept my distance, because I also had to be a role model of being this heterosexual Christian man who was not allowed and shouldn't believe in sexuality, being gay or lesbian. So it was all very, very strange.
yeah. So that's interesting. So did you like put up? Were you very sort of standoffish or whatever? Or
Yeah, I would go as far as saying that I probably came across homophobic.
right? Yes.
And I look back at that now, I would have, particularly in front of my wife, or in front of my family, in front of my Christian church friends, very much where the conversation ever led into around sexuality and
Mm,
about, you know, and there was some, you know, Christian inclusive leaders who was coming out, you know, and very much saying that they really are starting to question their whole view around sexuality and Christianity, and actually that and my church would have been quite against that, and my ministers would have been quite against that. So I very much would said vouch for them and said, oh, absolutely, they're right. You know, we shouldn't believe in that. You know, sexuality of being gay or lesbian is a sin, and actually, in fact, we shouldn't be part of that. And so, and it was strange, because one of my closest friends, and I look back and I say this, and people may wonder, oh, there's something more to this, but it actually was a close friend. We started nursing career together, and we were really good friends. And himself came across as heterosexual, and we both got married around the same time. He and his wife at the time, and me and my wife at the time became very good friends. He then became usher at my wedding. I became groomsman at his wedding, and that was all really close friends and as couples, as married couples
Mm.
in the church, in the same church. His marriage broke up maybe about 5 or 6 years into my marriage. His marriage broke up, and then he moved away to Belfast to be more near a city.
Mm.
And I remember his estranged wife phoning me one evening to tell me that he had come out and said he was gay.
Ah,
And
int-
actually, in fact, I recall this so strongly. That phone call, I remember thinking it really created something inside my stomach. I had butterflies in my stomach of nervousness with the sense, oh, people may think then I'm gay, but then there's something around the admiration for his bravery.
mm. Yeah.
And I think probably what resonated the most for me was my admiration for his bravery because he had ceased all contact. I wasn't able to make contact with him because he had changed his number. Nobody knew where he lived. He was a part of a very strict Christian family as well. So there was a struggle with some, particularly his parents, more so than his siblings. So it was just really interesting that I could see the prediction of how that might go if I was to come out.
Mm. That's amazing. Yeah. So you
Yeah,
obviously found each other because you had stuff in common or certain your
we did.
attitudes,
We
but
did.
you just
Yeah, and
suppressing that.
neither of us ever had that conversation or ever that discussion. And did I ever think he was gay? No, I didn't. I actually absolutely had no understanding around that he was gay. It didn't come across that he may be gay, whatever that may look like, coming across as being gay. The stereotypical is somebody may be gay because we think they may be camp. Lots of
Mm.
heterosexual men are quite camp, but they're not gay.
And so with your family, had you had conversations with your parents at all about that? Had that ever come up
N-
before you came out? Had they ever, did you know what
No,
their
no.
sort of attitudes were?
I think I come out in 2009. My mother died sadly at the age of 62, and that was in 2005.
Right.
So it was 4 years before I come out. I think my mother, actually, when I did come out and had the conversation with my father, which I'll share this morning in a while around that. But when I shared with my father then shared with me that my mother and him always thought I may be gay. And they had had this conversation as my parents many years ago, but they felt that I had never mentioned it. I never felt open to share that. And they thought maybe he's not.
Mm.
And actually, they just left that. So I think my mother, even she died in 2005, like she always knew that I was gay. And I think deep down, I always knew that she knew I was gay, but we'd never had the conversation. We were incredibly close. We had a very strong attachment and a very strong bond. And I think it was a very healthy, and I kind of live with that sadness that I was never able to come out. And I think if I had have come out when my mother was alive, I think the situation with my family situation, which I'll share soon, around would have been quite different.
Mm. Because she would have
Yeah.
stood up for you.
Yeah, I believe she would have. I believe, and some of my other family who are very close to me still and very supportive to me would have said if my mum had been here that definitely that would have been quite different. So I did around 6 years into my marriage, 7 years into my marriage, and this was about 3 or 4 years before my marriage ended. I did go to private Christian counseling,
Hmm.
but I went away to another quite a distance away to travel so these people wouldn't know me. And in that belief of counseling, I did that for maybe 6, 7 months. Uh, the counselor at the time was part of a very conservative counseling organization, and it was done very sensitively, privately. But they then started to tell me that they felt that I needed to go through reparative therapy. And for people who maybe don't understand what that is, it's a sense of understanding of trying to make you change
Mm.
on what your actual inner feelings may be, and actually say that it's more psychological than actually how you were born. So I went through this counseling that led into these religious leaders
Mm.
meeting me in counseling sessions with the counselor and to pray over me and to pray the demons out of my body and to help me come to the terms as they thought. And I thought was that I could change, that I no
Mm.
longer had this inner feeling of being a gay man, of attracted to men. And let's be clear, because we're a gay man doesn't mean to say we're attracted to every single man in the world.
Yeah.
We're not, as any heterosexual person. But it was that sense. And I went through that for 6 or 7 months and realized that actually nearly destroyed me. I actually look back at that and thinking psychologically, I think I was in a very dangerous situation that, yes, I have to take responsibility because I was the one who went and sought that,
Mm.
but also, and I engaged in it and facilitated it. But when I look back, the ethical
Mm.
treatment and the sense of safety of psychological and well-being was not good and actually was really unethical. And as we know, and we've seen even in the latter years around reparative therapy, even has gone to government level where they're trying to put a cease to this
Mm.
type of treatment. Because you had also some Christian psychiatrists had this belief
Yeah.
that they were employed by these churches as well as being a psychiatrist within the NHS, that they had this belief that it was okay to have this reparative therapy.
Mm. That's crazy to think that that's called counselling when
Yeah,
what I believe to be counselling, that I've had counselling, it's where they're listening to you and they're just kind of letting you sort of explain your story and trying to help you, not trying to brainwash you, which is what that
yeah, yeah,
sounds just like,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, and then I changed my career around that same stage. I left nursing and went to train in social work. So then I went to train to be a social worker because it's something I've always been interested in.
Mm.
And actually, even in my nursing career, I always wondered maybe I should have trained. So I worked as a nurse for 6 or 7 years, and then I went into social work and trained to be a social worker. And then I started to work alongside clinical psychologists as part of
Mm.
my professional career, and actually who maybe didn't have a faith in Christianity, but were very much professional in their own right and academic ability. And I worked with children's services. So at that time, we worked with young people, teenagers, young
Mm.
adolescents who maybe were battling with their sexuality. And then I
Mm.
could see that where I was working alongside clinical psychologists who were very much supporting young people and helping them around come to acceptance of their sexuality and
Mm.
to embrace their sexuality in a very safe, but also in a very fair way. And I started to realize, oh, so there are professionals here who really are psychologists who believe it's okay to be gay and to live a normal life and to
Mm.
be acceptance and find that inner acceptance and understand how you create your life to be
Yeah.
who you're meant to be and who you're created to be. And I started then it really conflicted with my various research and counseling and various other books that I'd read that were American Christian
Mm.
psychology were saying you couldn't do that. So there was such conflicting views around psychology and human behavior.
Did that blow your mind a bit? That
It
was
did,
this
absolutely
whole
did.
world that you just were repressed from.
It did, it did. And at that same stage, my marriage was breaking down, and that
Mm.
was coming into 10, 11 years of my marriage, 10.5 years. My marriage broke down for different reasons.
Mm.
So my marriage didn't break down because of, well, possibly because of my intersexuality,
Mm.
but my marriage broke down for a different reason. It wasn't to do with that I had come out and said I was gay.
Mm.
My marriage broke down. My wife had left the marriage, and then a year later, I developed the bravery to come out and say to my family, church, community, and friends that I was gay.
So did you, I guess, doing your new job, your new role, you must have known what was gonna happen when
I
you did
did.
do that.
I did. So I kind of had to premeditate what that was going to be like. I had to work out strategically how I was going to manage that. As I took a sabbatical to work in Los Angeles,
All right.
to work with young people who were homeless.
Hmm.
in a project out in Los Angeles, and that was a bit of an escapism for me. My marriage had broken down. I was in a bit of a broken place,
Hmm.
and actually, once my marriage had broken down, and we knew that we were never really going to be able to repair the marriage, and also the loss of my wife because I did love her. I
Mm.
really loved her, but I look back at it and I love that was a love of a very close friendship.
Mm.
Um, so I actually then escaped, and and there's a pattern in me, as I'll share this morning, around that escapism, which I'm very open about and very honest about. Um, yeah, so that sense of escapism to Los Angeles opened a new world around sexuality because there was a lot more things being liberal. And a
Mm.
lot more came across lots of different lifestyles. And I was only there for a little while. It wasn't for very long. But actually in that it kind of showed that sense. So I come back from LA and I planned my decision to share with my family. And I also was dealing with the loss of my mother who had died 4 years before that. So I
Mm.
was still in that grief process. But I knew that I could no longer suppress this. I knew that it wasn't healthy. So I planned it. I knew that I was going to be relocating to live in Belfast, to be away from my local community and where I'd lived and went near my family because I knew what that path was going to look like.
Mm.
I predicted it and I was right in that prediction. And I think it was good in some ways to predict that. So then it wasn't a bigger shock to think that I was leading myself down a false sense of security,
Mm.
thinking my family and close church friends would really stick by me and support me and accept me for being me,
Mm.
rather than with conditions. So then I shared with my family, and that then led to the breakdown of my relationship with my family.
And that sort of, yeah, that all ended abruptly, I guess, and there was no sort of comeback at all.
Yeah, it really was within a matter. I remember it was a Friday going to tell my father that I was gay, going to my father's house, my family home, to tell my father that I was gay, and that was quite a difficult and very, very nerve-wracking experience. My father was an older man. He was around 69, I think, at the time.
Hmm.
He was very involved in my church life as well, as we were all in the same church. My brother was very actively involved in that same church. And so I knew that this was going to have an impact on my family, my church life. So I shared with my father, and then my father decided to relay that information to my brother. And then I was charged to have a meeting with my church leaders. And in that meeting, I was brought to a meeting, um, and that was church leaders within the church. My brother was exempt from attending that meeting, although he was very involved in the church and was one of those leaders. But he was, because obviously it was the impartiality. So he was exempt from that, but he knew that was happening. And I was brought before a group of church leaders who then quizzed me quite heavily around my decision of saying that I was a gay man. And I remember one of the church leaders asking me, had I ever inappropriately, in a sexual behavioral way, uh, harmed somebody, because their view was somebody being gay, well, you are a sexual predator. And that really broke me, Grant, as I was a senior social worker at that stage in children's services working in safeguarding.
Mm.
So I really struggled in my professional integrity around that, but also for somebody to question and think I
Mm.
would behave in that way, as professionally my job was to safeguard children and to keep children safe. And that was very difficult. And I couldn't actually, and I'm generally somebody who can cope with being challenged and being quizzed. I kind of
Mm.
don't go into that freeze or flight mode. But I just was stunned by that.
Mm.
And I just had to just say, well, actually, my career, as you know, is safeguarding children and vulnerable adults. And actually, I'm offended by what you've said, because actually your question my professional and personal view of safety and keeping people safe. And it also helped me realize that some people's mentality was, well, being a gay person, you
Mm.
must be a sexual predator. And I was stunned by that. And I remember having that meeting with the church leaders and leaving that meeting. I had to hand over my keys. I was very involved in music and various other things in the church, so I had to hand over all of that. I was walked off the grounds of the church. The decision was made that if I didn't allow them to make an announcement to the church that I was stepping down from my roles and responsibilities within the church, that they would make an announcement that they've had to ask me to step down. And they felt that they wanted to give me that respect for me to say I was stepping down and resigning rather than actually them doing it for me more punitively. So that was a decision that was announced, and that weekend, and I had lots of my church friends within social media.
Mm.
I lost majority of my friendship group, my peer group, my close friends that weekend, and that following week was my transition to move to Belfast, where I was working anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah,
thought, right, back to that pattern as I've mentioned earlier on around escapism, that sense fight,
yeah.
flight, or freeze. So in those scenarios, I recognize now that was a form of flight, and I needed to go somewhere. I needed to be somewhere. And
Oh,
I remember uh, going to look for a rented accommodation. Didn't even know how to do that before because I had never
no.
had to have that experience.
Yeah.
I've never lived on my own from I lived with my parents until I got married and then was married for 10.5 years. So at 35, having to get used to living on your own was a bit strange.
Mm.
And even though I had lots of confidence, lots of friends who all do that, but for me, I kind of was so used to living with people.
Mm.
And actually, it was quite a scary time. I remember moving to Belfast in a little rented accommodation, two up, two down, in a little private place that I felt that nobody would know where I lived, that nobody could find
Mm.
me, with a fear how that would be. It was near my work, which was very, very helpful. And then I'd had to restart building a friendship group
Mm. Yeah.
and new hobbies and new interests, because majority of my hobbies and interests were associated to my church friends and my Christian friends.
That's brutal. Just overnight, just being excommunicated. Just I don't know if
Yeah,
that is that the word. I don't know, but it's sort of just
yeah,
completely
yeah,
blanked out. But yeah, I know that I don't like to give up a fight, and but flight is a good one when actually you're not welcome anymore. It's like there's no
yeah,
point. You can't fix it anymore. It's done. It's
yeah,
broken, right? So
yeah.
so well done for getting out of there.
Yeah, and I think in that, I remember that first few weeks of living in this little two up, two down house in Belfast.
Mm,
And actually, I remember the first few nights I was quite scared living on my own because I'd never got used to that. Um, but actually then started to realize, oh, this is quite nice. Actually, I've got my own space. Yes,
mm,
it's small. It's a very different lifestyle, but actually, this is okay. Actually, then I started to get out and start to go to local things like music events. Started to go. First time ever being in a gay bar
mm.
was my first weekend, second weekend of living on my own, and at the age of 35, walking into a gay bar. I'd never been in a gay bar before, and thinking, okay, how do I do this? If
Mm.
somebody comes to speak to me, how do I manage this? I was just such a quiver. I felt like a 16-year-old who really is the first time ever going to a disco.
Yeah, and I guess within I don't know minutes, hours, or whatever, you probably felt a little bit more accepted.
I did. But again, also struggled a little bit with that. I struggled with that because I was 35, so I
Mm,
wasn't a young gay man.
mm,
I was 35, went into this gay bar, was meeting a work colleague who I knew was gay, who had said to me when I come out to him, well, he was very supportive and he was there with his partner and he says, come and meet us for a drink. And I said, well, where are the gay bars? And he says, and he laughed, he says, you don't even know where the gay bars are? And I says, no, I don't. So we met for a drink and they were very kind to me and they were very kind to me and they were really good friends and support to me, to help me understand what the gay lifestyle may be because it was quite different from my lifestyle of going on a church 2 or 3 times a week to
yeah.
church services to going to a pub because that wasn't my lifestyle. I had never drank alcohol, so that was a whole different thing. Not that I got into this whole thing of getting drunk, because even to this day, alcohol is not a big thing for me. But
No.
again, actually, just to go somewhere that's a social setting where actually you can actually have conversation with people, you can hear some nice music, and there's a sense of feeling accepted. But also there was a sense on getting to know the gay world as I experienced, and I'm not saying this is for everybody. Um, I experienced that there's a sense of, well, people's trying to suss out who this new person is because I'm a strange person who's walked into a gay bar that most people know each other. It was a struggle to be part of the gay world for my own
Mm,
uh, oppressive lifestyle
mm,
that I had to allow myself that it was okay. I remember going out to the this gay walking group, and the first they met on a Sunday morning, one Sunday in the month, and my first time, and they asked, "Are people comfortable with photographs?" And I actually asked, "Could I not have my photograph taken?" Because I feared that that could be on social media, and actually some of my old church friends would see that. And then I started to realize, well, who cares?
yeah,
I've made that decision. Who cares? So I had to work through that, and
yeah,
they were very sensitive and very respectful and very understanding to me around that. And certainly there was no pressure from them, and I really respect that and appreciated that.
yeah. It's just a process of realization for you because you're having to sort of come to terms with it, and it's good when you realize that it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks.
Absolutely. And I think my coping mechanism then I really developed. I always enjoyed study, and academic study. And for me, part of that escapism was I started to really get myself into study. I'd already obviously qualified and been working as a senior social worker, but then I did a few postgraduate diplomas, did another degree, and then led me in the latter part of completing a master's. And
Mm,
it was a way of me being able to, because I enjoyed learning. I've always had a crave to learn more
mm.
and understand more. So that was really, really helpful. And actually, I look back at that, that was very therapeutic, even though people thinking, how can study be therapeutic? But for me, it worked for me.
Yeah, you needed a massive distraction, and so you
Yeah,
must have like learned, taken loads of your experiences and then put them into your job.
yeah, it did. And actually, it really helped me understand more around inclusivity and diversity.
Mm,
When I come out and moved to Belfast, I was working with a very large national charity.
mm,
And I was a senior manager in that national charity at the time, who were a very inclusive national charity. And that was really, really helpful for me. And actually, I was able to be open and honest with them because they knew me as being the heterosexual Tyrone, who also was a Christian man who was very involved in his church life and very staunch Christian.
mm,
Then they started to see this person who was being open and saying, now he's gay. He is more inclusive in
mm,
his understanding and his lifestyle. And I started because I still held a faith in God, and my faith was really, and still my faith is really important for me. And everybody has various types of faith, whatever that may be, and I
mm,
respect that. But at that time, I started to look at saying, right, what are some of the cultural things that I can really adapt to and understand, where it gives me a little bit of understanding around where I'm at. And in 2009, when I come out, I at that same time there was a film just just produced and come on, and it was A Prayer for Bobby.
mm,
And it was Sigourney Weaver acted as a mother of a son who would come out and said he was gay. They were an American family. They were involved in a very evangelical Baptist Christian staunch movement in
mm,
America, and it's based on a true story. But Bobby came and shared with his family in the film. He shared with his family, his parents, about being gay. Dad couldn't accept it and was really, really quite struggled with this idea that his son may be gay and the whole embarrassment and shame that I think the father portrayed in the film. And Sigourney Weaver was the exact same thing. She struggled with that.
mm,
And sadly, Bobby then he got into a lot of kind of LGBTQI inclusive groups and was like a part of an American pride group
mm,
around inclusion and did a lot of kind of protesting. And then obviously the shame that he developed from his family, from his church friends, and obviously led to him into a place of seclusion
mm.
and a sense of rejection and isolation. And sadly, in the story, he took his own life. And actually, that resonated with me quite a lot because I had times, I'm being very truthful, and not to be morbid in saying this, but there had times I had questioned my whole decision around ending my life,
Hmm.
as a sense of feeling rejection, abandoned, loss, a sense of shame that I felt I carried, and that in my local community, within my church life, within my family, and feeling quite marginalized. And I did. I recall two separate times that those were two dark places and stages in my life. And actually, it was through friends who started to pick up that I was not wanting to go out. I was starting to isolate myself.
Mm.
And actually, they became those nurturing, good friends. And actually, that really got me through that and getting into study. And I remember one evening, it was a dark place, and actually, I contemplated taking my own life. And that film really resonated something in me that actually I could have been in that same scenario as Bobby,
Mm.
his character. He was a much younger man. I think maybe in his 20s. Obviously, I was 35, but actually, how he was impacted by his family, and sadly, Bobby took his own life in the story. But then that turned that his mother, Sigourney Weaver, then decided that through the loss of her son and realizing the impact of his sexuality and feeling abandoned
Mm.
and feeling marginalized from their church community and family, that she transformed her belief around
Hmm.
Christianity and sexuality, and around culture and around, so she then became a real inclusive champion, really, and went round lots of church movements, lots of social movements,
Mm.
preaching and
Mm.
teaching people around the idea around inclusion, and very much became a very pro. It's based on a true story.
Mm.
Became a pro around inclusion and faith and culture, around sexuality. And that was really quite liberating for me. I always wished that my family may have done something similar,
Mm.
and that was more about the child in me, hoping I wanted to be rescued. I wanted my family to reaccept me, and I was always lived in hope that they would um, turn their thoughts or change their thoughts around acceptance. That didn't happen. And my father died in 2017. And sadly, I had a number of years of not able to have contact with him,
Mm.
as that contact had been ceased on his behalf, on my brother's behalf, and the church community's behalf. So I actually was actually studying my master's, and I was actually in a lecture one day when I had a missed call from my brother, who I hadn't spoken to and hadn't had contact for many, many years,
Mm.
to let me know that our father had been critically rushed to hospital. And I was able to speak to him on the phone as my brother was in the ambulance with him. So we shared a few kind words to each other. As I got to the hospital, it's interesting. The hospital he was going to, and he sadly had surgery and then went to an intensive support unit and was on a
Mm.
life support machine, but actually it was a department that I had been a senior nurse in.
Mm.
So actually a lot of my ex-colleagues were nursing my father. And that actually was a sense of quite surreal, in
Yeah.
that my father, I sat at his bedside, held his hand for those last 24 hours before the ventilator, life support machine, was turned off, and that was a decision that we knew. And my brother was there, so it was quite a difficult, quite a strange situation.
Mm.
But actually, the focus was around the loss of dad. We knew dad was dying. But actually, to have a lot of my ex-colleagues,
Yeah.
they're actually a consultant anaesthetist who was head of that department, who actually I'd worked alongside as a senior nurse in that department. It was quite meaningful in
Hmm.
some ways,
Mm.
even though it was a loss and tragic situation, but actually quite meaningful. And actually, for me, whatever people may have faith and say, well, actually, how this all can come together as just maybe coincidence. However, for me, that was something being able to tell me that actually you've got other people here.
Yes, it helped. That's
Yeah,
really, really good
did.
to know
Yeah,
that there was
yeah.
someone else. You weren't isolated in that moment of despair.
No, no, no.
I was going to ask about the people who looked out for you when you were really down. Were they people from
Yeah,
the church? Were they people you'd met in Belfast? Were they
yeah,
colleagues?
yeah. Yeah, so they're colleagues. So actually, the first weekend I moved to Belfast in 2009, going into 2010, actually had no friends, because my friends were all my church friends, had
Mm.
no friends other than work colleagues. I always had a professional position that I never really socialized with friends or work colleagues, sorry.
Mm,
I kind of was that sense of my career that there was professional boundaries, very much lived by that. And probably the common thing coming across here, which I've shared before, is I'm very boundary focused.
mm,
And actually, sometimes that's not always a good thing, but sometimes it is.
mm,
But yeah, so I had never actually socialized with friends, particularly friends that I worked alongside. But those friendships then really developed. And actually, I remember two work colleagues who became really good friends and still good friends today, who really then asked me to join various things that they were part of that with similar interest on, like a choir, which was like a local community choir. I remember going to it, loved it, really enjoyed
mm,
it. Another friend and I going out for walks, and just getting, spend time together as friends.
mm,
Um, both girls. Which I was just really that sense of really feeling really accepted. They were very
mm,
inclusive. They had lots of gay friends, and actually just never really intruded in my personal story. They allowed me to share what I felt comfortable to share, but never felt awkward around that. And that
mm,
was really, really meaningful
mm.
and appreciated. Yeah. So that really helped me to find my feet and widen my social group. And actually that's been wonderful. Yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that they're both women because
Yeah.
I guess, guys aren't great at reaching out or necessarily sort of getting in touch and saying, "Are you all right?" And that's obviously very much a thing that we need to do a lot more nowadays, is just to make sure that we are asking our male friends, checking in with them and all the rest of it, which is
Yeah.
kind of what this podcast is a little bit about, I guess. Really, is just
Yeah.
sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
hearing what other guys have to say.
Yeah,
So.
and I think for myself, Grant, sharing my story, and actually this is the first time, and I really thank you for allowing me to share my story, but this is the first time I have shared my story ever in
Right.
any type of method, platform, in a podcast or anything socially. I've never, but I'm at a place now I'm able to do that comfortably, that it's not causing me any concern.
No.
But actual fact, for me, in the last 3 or 4 years, well-being of men has become really important to me. Really important.
Mm,
More and more. It's just not because I'm a social worker, ex-psychiatric nurse, but actual fact, more that sense of trying to empower men to be able to talk
mm,
and to share their story. We see high levels to even to this day of suicide and attempted suicide, particularly with men, and particularly young men,
mm,
but men as a whole, for many different reasons. But if I can be part of supporting one man to be
mm,
able to find themselves, whether that's to do with sexuality, whether that's just to do with who they are as a human being,
mm,
and whether that's to do with where they're at in their trauma in their life and their
mm,
experience in their life, just to be able to understand that we're all unique
mm,
and we all have the right to be loved and to love. And I think that a view of being kind to yourself,
mm,
being kind, being good to yourself, look after yourself. I don't mean that in a selfish way, but in a way to be kind, accept yourself,
mm,
going rather than going through periods of maybe self-loathing,
mm.
self-hatred, self-dislike, or self-acceptance.
Definitely. I mean, that's certainly the biggest thing. I think, once you've accepted yourself, and
Yeah,
uh, and you also realise that you don't have to worry what other people think. If
yeah,
if other people don't want to know, I mean, you've experienced like the worst case of that, where you've literally been forced out of the village kind of
mm,
thing. It's like
mm,
the worst kind of thing, but you've managed to rebuild yourself from that, and I mean, you're a very sort of, you've got a great career, and you're doing incredibly well, and you've been incredibly strong to resilient, as I said in my intro, just to kind of build yourself back up, and look where you are. So
yeah.
it's not, it's not the end, even if you do have to
No,
leave and people don't want you anymore. But I think generally, most times, people are accepting, and
Yeah.
and
Eh,
we'll be all
yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a situation. I was back home in Northern Ireland, back in the New Year time in January, early January this year.
Mm,
I went back home to Northern Ireland to visit some close friends, work colleagues, and some kind of close family that I'm still in very close contact with. And I went to visit my parents' grave, and it was very, very interesting. And my partner was with me.
hmm.
And My partner's been to my parents' grave once or twice before with me. But went to visit my parents' grave. And actual fact, as I was standing at my parents' grave, I heard the voice of a gentleman calling, shouting out my name. And I turned round, and it was an ex-neighbor where I lived in my family home. And I thought, okay, right, how is this going to go? And he come up to me. You call him John. He come up to me and he said he shook my hand and he said to me, "Oh, Tyrone, I thought that was you. I haven't seen you for 25 years. How are you?" And
Oh,
I said, "I'm really good." And actually, we were neighbors. Actually, his mother and my mother were very close friends. We all played together when we were children in our local community, but haven't seen him for 20, maybe 30 years at
yeah.
least. And as fact, my partner was standing there, and and I just automatically just said, "John, can I introduce you to my partner?" And sure, I introduced my partner to John as well. And John shook my partner's hand, was very relaxed around it. My partner was very relaxed around it. And I thought, okay, this is okay. And then I said to John, "I'm not sure you're aware, John, that my lifestyle is different from maybe we last spoke." He said, "Yeah, I knew that." He says, "Your brother had told me." He said, and I said, "Okay." And he says, "But you know what, Tyrone? As long as you're happy and you look happy and you look well, and I'm really pleased to see you."
Oh, that must be so good to hear something
And
like
that
that
was
from your
just,
childhood and from
yeah,
your early
yeah,
life.
yeah. Now, he wouldn't have been part of a church community, and I
No.
don't believe he still is. But actually, what had come to resonate with me, where in my head, I probably thought everybody had abandoned me in my local community where we lived. I don't think they had. I think it was the church community had that sense of feeling abandoned.
Mm,
My local community majority didn't really care.
mm, exactly.
Didn't really care.
Yeah. That's that is the sort of the church thing, right? There's just a lot of repression and stuff going
Yeah,
on.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we see that here, obviously in some of the bigger churches, national churches here,
Yeah.
even in England, where the idea around acceptance, around inclusion, and actually where there's a lot of kind of split in church movements now around the acceptance of gay people and even gay clergy and to be gay clergy and kind of where that sits around that. And so, if it's within the Church of England, if you're gay clergy, you can have a civil partnership, but you can't have a wedding. You can't be married to your partner.
Right.
And also, if you are in a civil partnership, that civil partnership can't be done within proper blessing within a civil partnership within the church. A local vicar who's open to that can say two prayers to you and your partner as part of your civil partnership, but you can't have your civil partnership within the church movement. And that's something really I struggle with because I'm in a civil partnership.
Yes.
I struggle with that because it's based on love.
Mm. What a shame.
Mm.
So yeah, still a long way to go. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So have you got any advice that you might like to impart? Anything that you have learnt on your coming out, journey?
I think reflecting and sharing my story today, and I've thought about this prior to our this morning. Um, I think allowing yourself to go through the stages of hurt and pain and loss and joy and happiness, all the various emotions that we go through any type of loss, to not to try to control that at
Mm,
what stage you should be at by this stage,
mm,
because that's not going to work. And it is a form of loss and grief and acceptance and newness.
mm.
So trying to balance the maybe negative emotions to some of the positive emotions and allowing yourself to experience the positive emotions as well, and not to feel I've just only got to be stuck on the negative emotions of what I'm going through, but allow yourself to be open to new experiences
Mm.
and to find yourself in that.
Great. And when you met your partner, when was that? How long ago was that?
Yeah. So met my partner in 2017,
Hmm.
and it was just literally a few weeks after my father had died. And my partner's English, but was working in Northern Ireland,
Hmm.
and we met in Northern Ireland. My partner relocated back in 2018 to England, and then I moved across in 2019. I was finishing off my master's, and I graduated in 2019, and then moved across to the mainland in 2019, and have been here since. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, it sounds like yes, things are slowly starting to sort of heal,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what you
Yeah.
want, isn't it?
Yeah. And actually, in fact, I look back at my story and sharing it this morning, and I kind of thinking it's like something I'm watching on TV. I kind of don't feel it's to do with me now because I'm so further on from it. And actually, I suppose one of the things I'd encourage anybody else listening today, you will not always be in the scenario that you may find yourself in.
Mm.
There is hope
Mm.
and there is time to be able to move forward as long as you've got support, that you've got the right type of help that you need. But actually, you can move forward with this. And actually, there are brighter days ahead.
That's right. I've been at rock bottom myself, and that's the one thing I think I always try and remember is
Mm.
that get through today, and
Absolutely.
tomorrow's another day, and
Yeah.
things are swings and roundabouts, and I'm also aware that when things are going very well, to make the most of those moments because you just don't know what's around the corner. So
That's right.
I think it's very important just to make the most and value the time you're in at right now, which is really
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Fantastic. So I normally will sort of wrap up and say what you're going to talk about, but I know what you're going to talk about because you already mentioned it. But yeah, just remind us again for the companion podcast, Chaps Out Culture. Um, I'm going to ask you to come on and talk about a bit of queer culture, right? So what are we going to talk about today?
So we're going to talk about the view of around religion and faith
Mm.
in a sense of sexuality and inclusion. And it's based on a film called The Prayer for Bobby. And it came out in 2009 and just resonates to the same year that I come out as a gay man.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Tyrone, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And yeah, it's really important. I say in this podcast, that you're not alone. Everyone's gone through this, who's come out, have been through this before, and you know, there are other people who've been going through something similar. So I really hope your words can sort of go some way to helping anyone out there who might be listening. So thanks a
Yeah.
lot. Cheers.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Chaps Out, and to Tyrone for being so honest, reflective and courageous in sharing his story. What really stayed with me was the strength he shows in being able to look back on everything he went through, the rejection, the loss of his church community, and the breakdown of family relationships, and speak about it now with a kind of distance and perspective, almost as if he's observing a chapter of his life that no longer defines him. His story showed us that coming out can bring grief and loss, but also growth and healing. As Tyrone reminded us, you will not always be in the scenario that you may find yourself in. There is hope and there is time to be able to move forward. And another message that really stayed with me was his belief that we all have the right to be loved and to love, along with his encouragement to be kind to yourself and accept yourself. If this conversation resonated with you, always remember, you are not alone. And please subscribe to Chaps Out wherever you listen so you never miss an episode, along with episodes of our companion podcast, Chaps Out Culture. And please follow us on YouTube, TikTok and Instagram. And also rate and review. It helps the podcast get noticed and reach the people who may need to hear it. And give us a share. And if you like what we're doing, you can donate on the link in the bio. Your support will help with running costs and keep these conversations flowing. And if you grew up in the UK and came out as bisexual or gay later in life and have an inspiring story you'd like to share, please email chapsoutpod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. Take care.